Why are there not more people talking about the controversial legacy of Pope Pius XII? Eugenio Pacelli, who ascended to the papacy as Pope Pius XII on March 2, 1939, assumed his role during a period of profound global crisis. His election coincided with the rapid escalation of geopolitical tensions. The foreboding clouds of war were swiftly gathering over Europe. Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime had already exhibited its expansionist ambitions and its virulent anti-Semitic ideology. The world teetered on the brink of a conflict that would engulf nations and result in unprecedented human suffering. Pope Pius XII, with his extensive diplomatic experience, including his tenure as nuncio to Germany, was uniquely positioned to navigate the complex political landscape of the time. He was acutely aware of the imminent danger facing both the Church and humanity. His diplomatic background significantly influenced his approach to the escalating tensions. Having witnessed the rise of Nazism firsthand, he understood the complexities of engaging with totalitarian regimes. This experience undoubtedly shaped his belief in the efficacy of negotiation and discreet intervention over public confrontation, a stance that would later become a focal point of scholarly debate regarding his pontificate. The new pope inherited a church already under duress in various parts of Europe, particularly in Germany, where Catholic institutions and clergy faced increasing persecution. His primary concern was the preservation of the church and the protection of its adherents, a responsibility that weighed heavily upon him as the specter of war loomed. The international community viewed the Vatican with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Many anticipated that the Pope, as a significant moral authority, would play a crucial role in either averting the conflict or mitigating its horrors. Pope Pius XII himself was deeply committed to peace, a theme that would resonate throughout his papacy. However, the path to peace was fraught with obstacles, and the options available to him were constrained by the political realities of an era dominated by aggressive nationalism and ideological extremism. His every word and action would be scrutinized, both by contemporary observers and by future historians seeking to understand his complex legacy during one of history's darkest chapters. The decisions made by Pope Pius XII during World War II, particularly concerning the Holocaust, have been the subject of extensive scholarly inquiry and debate for decades. Was he a passive observer, failing to leverage his moral authority to unequivocally condemn the atrocities, or was he a pragmatic leader who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to save as many lives as possible, believing that public denunciations would exacerbate the plight of the persecuted? This essay will examine the multifaceted actions and decisions of Pope Pius XII, drawing upon historical records, testimonies, and recent archival discoveries to present a nuanced perspective on this contentious period of his pontificate, aiming for a comprehensive understanding rather than simplistic condemnation or uncritical praise. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, plunging Europe into World War II, Pope Pius XIII had been pontiff for a mere 6 months. His immediate response was one of profound sorrow and a fervent desire for a swift end to hostilities. He recognized the immense suffering that war would bring and dedicated his initial efforts towards diplomatic channels, hoping to mediate a peaceful resolution or at least limit the conflict's scope. The Vatican, as a neutral state, found itself in a unique but precarious position, striving to maintain impartiality while witnessing the unfolding aggression. The Pope's early actions reflected a deep-seated commitment to peace, a principle that had been central to his priestly and diplomatic career before his election to the papacy. In October 1939, Pope Pius XII issued his first encyclical Summi Pontificatus on the unity of human society. While not explicitly naming the Nazi regime, the encyclical condemned the deification of the state, the rejection of Christian morality in political life, and theories of racial superiority. It spoke of the ever-increasing host of Christ's enemies and lamented the premeditated aggression against a smaller and true to Ljubivi, hard-working nation, under the pretext of a threat which was neither real nor intended. Many understood this as a clear, albeit diplomatically phrased, critique of Germany's actions against Poland and the underlying ideologies fueling the conflict. The encyclical called for a return to natural law and Christian charity as the foundations for a just and lasting peace. The Pope's diplomatic efforts continued behind the scenes. He communicated with leaders of belligerent nations, urging restraint and a return to negotiations. He was particularly concerned about the fate of Catholics in occupied territories and sought assurances for their safety and religious freedom. However, the escalating brutality of the war and the intransigence of the Nazi regime made such diplomatic overtures increasingly difficult and often fruitless.
Im Süden hat der Gegner Zossen genommen und stößt auf Stahnsdorf vor. Der Feind operiert jetzt am nördlichen Stadtrand zwischen Frohnau und Pankow und im Osten ist der Feind bis zur Linie Lichtenberg-Marsdorf-Karlshorst gelangt.
Mit dem Angriff Steiners wird das alles in Ordnung kommen.
Liko Mead Brennender Sorgi with burning concern, which had been smuggled into Germany and read from Catholic pulpits, directly condemning Nazism and its racist doctrines. By upholding this powerful critique, Pius XII signaled a continuity in the Church's opposition to Nazi ideology. However, the challenge he faced was how to translate this moral stance into effective action in a world where brute force seemed to triumph over ethical considerations. His early responses set the tone for a pontificate that would be defined by the immense pressures and moral dilemmas of a global conflict, forcing him to navigate a narrow path between public denunciation and discreet intervention. While Pope Pius XI's public statements during the war have been a source of ongoing debate, his direct and indirect actions to save Jews and other persecuted individuals are increasingly documented and acknowledged. Evidence suggests that a significant number of Jewish people, particularly in Italy, owed their survival to initiatives supported or directly orchestrated by the Vatican. These efforts were often clandestine due to the extreme danger involved for both the rescuers and the rescued. The Pope understood that overt actions could provoke severe retaliation from the Nazi and fascist authorities, potentially jeopardizing the very people he sought to protect. Therefore, many instructions were given orally, and records were deliberately kept minimal to avoid incriminating those involved in these life-saving operations. In Rome itself, during the German occupation from 1943 to 1944, an extensive network of rescue was activated. Over 4,200 Jews found refuge in numerous Roman convents and monasteries, and an additional 160 were sheltered directly within the walls of Vatican City, an independent state. It is estimated that approximately 80% of the Jews in Rome survived the Nazi occupation, a remarkably high percentage compared to other occupied European cities. This success is attributed in large part to the Church's efforts, often initiated or encouraged by Pius X. He personally ordered religious institutions to open their doors to those fleeing persecution, regardless of their faith, transforming sacred spaces into sanctuaries of hope amidst the surrounding terror. Beyond Rome, Pope Pius XII utilized his diplomatic network and personal influence to aid Jews across Europe. He instructed papal nuncios and delegates in various countries, such as Archbishop Angelo Roncalli, the future Pope John XXIII, in Turkey, and Archbishop Clemens August Graf von Galen in Germany, to intervene on behalf of Jewish populations. These interventions included protesting deportations, providing false papers, facilitating emigration, and offering material assistance. For instance, in 1939, Pope Pius XII, for 20,000 visas for German Jews seeking to emigrate to Brazil, though ultimately, due to various governmental obstacles, fewer than 10,000 were granted. This early effort demonstrates his concern for the plight of Jews even before the full scale of the Holocaust became widely known. The Vatican also established an office specifically dedicated to helping endangered people during the war. This office, as revealed by more recent archival research, handled thousands of pleas for help, many from Jewish individuals and families. While the Vatican's resources and influence were not limitless, and its efforts were often thwarted by the brutal efficiency of the Nazi regime and the complicity or indifference of other governments, the sheer scale of its rescue activities is becoming increasingly clear. These actions, undertaken quietly but effectively, paint a picture of a pontiff deeply engaged in humanitarian efforts, working through complex channels to save as many lives as possible under extraordinarily difficult and dangerous circumstances. The most persistent criticism leveled against Pope Pius XIV concerns his public silence regarding the Nazi atrocities, particularly the systematic extermination of the Jewish people. Critics argue that as the head of the Catholic Church and a significant moral voice on the world stage, he had a responsibility to issue a clear, unequivocal, and public condemnation of the Holocaust. They contend that such a powerful denunciation might have influenced public opinion in Axis and occupied countries, potentially encouraging resistance or at least raising greater awareness of the crimes being committed. This perceived failure to speak out forcefully has led some historians and commentators to label him as a silent pope, questioning the moral courage and leadership of his pontificate during this critical period. However, defenders of Pope Pius XII, including many historians and individuals directly involved in Vatican affairs during the war, argue that his public stance was a calculated diplomatic strategy. They maintain that a fiery public condemnation of Hitler and the Nazi regime would not only have been ineffective, but could have been counterproductive. Such a move, they suggest, might have provoked even harsher reprisals against Jews and Catholics in Nazi-controlled territories. The Pope was acutely aware of the vulnerability of Catholics under Nazi rule, particularly in Poland, where the Church faced brutal persecution. He feared that an open confrontation could lead to the intensification of these persecutions and potentially endanger the covert rescue operations already underway. This argument for strategic silence points to the example of the Dutch bishops. In 1942, when Dutch Catholic bishops publicly protested the deportation of Jews, the Nazi occupiers retaliated by rounding up and deporting Catholics of Jewish descent, including Edith Stein, St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. This tragic outcome was reportedly seen by Pius XIV as a stark warning of the potential consequences of public denunciations. He believed that quiet diplomacy, clandestine aid, and working through intermediaries, offered a more effective, albeit less visible, means of providing assistance and saving lives. His focus was on practical results rather than grand public gestures that might have satisfied moral outrage but achieved little in terms of actual rescue or relief. Furthermore, it is important to note that Pope Pius XII was not entirely silent. He made several public statements and addresses that, while often couched in general terms, condemned the horrors of war, racial persecution, and the oppression of peoples. His 1942 Christmas message, for instance, spoke of the hundreds of thousands of persons who, without any fault on their part, sometimes only because of their nationality or race, have been consigned to death or to a slow decline. While not explicitly naming Jews or Nazis, contemporary observers, including the Allied powers and the Axis regimes themselves, understood the Pope's intended meaning. The Nazi regime, in fact, often reacted angrily to Vatican pronouncements, viewing them as interference and criticism, suggesting that the Pope's words, though carefully chosen, did have an impact. Section 5. Condemnation or Prudence. The dilemma of public pronouncements. The debate over Pope Pius XII's public stance during the Holocaust often centers on the stark choice between outright condemnation and strategic prudence. Critics such as John Cornwell, in his controversial book Hitler's Pope, have gone so far as to accuse Pius XIII of legitimizing Hitler's regime through the Reichskonkordat, an earlier treaty signed when Pacelli was Cardinal Secretary of State, and even harboring anti-Semitic sentiments. These are serious charges that paint a picture of a pope who, at best, prioritized institutional interests over moral imperatives, and at worst, was complicit through his silence. Such interpretations emphasize the perceived moral failure to use the full weight of the papacy to denounce the unprecedented evil of the Holocaust in the most explicit terms possible. Conversely, those who defend Pius XII's approach argue that his actions were guided by a profound sense of responsibility and a pragmatic assessment of a dire situation. They contend that public condemnations, while perhaps emotionally satisfying, would have been strategically disastrous. The Nazi regime was notoriously impervious to moral suasion and reacted with extreme brutality to any perceived opposition. A direct papal denunciation, it is argued, could have triggered a massive crackdown on Catholics throughout Nazi-occupied Europe, dismantled the Church's existing aid networks, and led to the deaths of many more Jews and Christians alike. This perspective suggests that the Pope chose a path designed to save the maximum number of lives, even if it meant enduring criticism for his apparent reticence. Historical context is crucial in understanding this dilemma. The Vatican was a tiny, neutral enclave surrounded by fascist Italy, a close ally of Nazi Germany. Its capacity for direct military or political intervention was non-existent. Its power lay in its moral authority and its diplomatic channels, both of which were severely constrained by the wartime environment. Pope Pius XII had demanded that Nazi diplomat Joachim von Ribbentrop allow Vatican representatives to document Nazi atrocities in Poland, a request that was flatly refused, illustrating the limits of papal influence when confronting a ruthless, totalitarian power. The Pope was walking a diplomatic tightrope, attempting to alleviate suffering without provoking catastrophic retaliation from a regime that had demonstrated its utter contempt for international law and human dignity. Indeed, the Vatican radio did make nearly 200 broadcasts in various languages, condemning violence and appealing for peace and human rights. While these broadcasts often avoided direct naming of perpetrators, to maintain a veneer of neutrality essential for its diplomatic and humanitarian work, their anti-Nazi and anti-totalitarian thrust was widely understood. The Pope also personally intervened in numerous individual cases, using his nuncios and other church officials to plead for lives and provide aid. The decision to primarily work covertly was thus not born of indifference, according to this view, but from a painful calculation that this was the most effective way to help those in peril, a choice between the ideal of prophetic witness and the practical imperative of rescue. Section 6. Echoes of Gratitude. Testimonies from Jewish leaders and survivors. Despite the criticisms leveled against Pope Pius XII for his public stance, numerous prominent Jewish figures and Holocaust survivors offered significant praise for his efforts after the war. These testimonies provide a crucial counterpoint to the narrative of a silent pope and suggest a more complex reality, where his discreet actions had a profound impact on many lives. Albert Einstein, the renowned physicist and a Jewish refugee from Nazism, publicly acknowledged the Church's role, stating in 1940, "Only the Church stood squarely across the path of Hitler's campaign for suppressing truth. I had not previously given any special thought to the Church, but now I feel a great affection and admiration because the Church alone has had the courage and persistence to stand for intellectual truth and moral freedom." Other influential Jewish leaders also expressed their gratitude. Golda Meir, who would later become Prime Minister of Israel, stated during a eulogy for Pope Pius XIII in 1958, "When fearful martyrdom came to our people in the decade of Nazi terror, the voice of the Pope was raised for its victims. The life of our times was enriched by a voice speaking out about great moral truths above the tumult of daily conflict." Similarly, Israel's first chief rabbi, Yitzhak Halevi Herzog, sent a message in February 1944 expressing his sincere thanks for the powerful aid that you have afforded to our unfortunate brothers in these fated hours. These statements from respected Jewish personalities, made both during and after the war, highlight a contemporary recognition of the Pope's humanitarian work. The World Jewish Congress also acknowledged the Pope's interventions. In 1945, Dr. Leon Kubowitsky, later Aryeh Leon Kubovi, the head of the World Jewish Congress, personally thanked the Pope for his efforts, presenting him with a gift of money in recognition of the work of the Holy See in rescuing Jews from fascist and Nazi persecutions. Furthermore, in September 1945, it was reported that 80 delegates from German concentration camps representing Jewish survivors journeyed to Rome specifically to thank Pope Pius XII for his actions on their behalf during the war. Such gestures from those who had directly experienced the horrors of the Holocaust and witnessed the Church's aid provide compelling evidence of the Vatican's positive impact. These expressions of thanks from Jewish individuals and organizations are significant because they come from those who were most directly affected by the Nazi persecution. While historical debate continues, these first-hand accounts and contemporary acknowledgments cannot be easily dismissed. They suggest that For many victims of the Holocaust, the actions taken by Pope Pius XII and the Catholic Church under his leadership were perceived not as silence or indifference, but as a vital lifeline in a time of unprecedented darkness. These voices form an essential part of the historical record and contribute to a more nuanced understanding of the Pope's wartime role, emphasizing the tangible results of his often quiet, behind-the-scenes interventions. Section 7, Opening the Vaults, New Revelations from the Vatican Archives. The historical debate surrounding Pope Pius XIII's pontificate during World War II entered a new phase in March 2020 with the opening of the Vatican Apostolic Archives for this period. For decades, scholars had eagerly awaited access to these crucial documents, hoping they would shed more definitive light on the Pope's actions, decisions, and motivations concerning the Holocaust. The release of millions of pages of material has initiated a vast research effort, with historians from around the world delving into these records. This unprecedented access promises to deepen our understanding of the Vatican's inner workings during one of the most turbulent and morally challenging eras in modern history. Early findings from this newly accessible material are beginning to emerge, offering fresh insights. One particularly significant discovery, highlighted by historian Hubert Wolff and his team at the University of Münster, involves a vast collection of approximately 10,000 letters, totaling around 17,400 pages, written in 17 different languages. These are pleas for help sent directly to Pope Pius XIII during the war, primarily from Jewish individuals and families desperate to escape persecution. The analysis of these petitions is a monumental task, estimated to take another 25 years, but preliminary research indicates that the Pope personally saw about 10% of these requests. The Vatican often attempted to intervene, though its success was frequently hampered by the policies of external governments. For example, one document case from December 1942 involves a request from Martin Wachskertz for Swiss visas for himself and his family. While the Vatican Secretariat of State did forward the request, Swiss authorities ultimately denied the visas, illustrating the limitations the Holy See faced even when it tried to act. To facilitate broader research, the University of Münster has launched an online resource titled Asking the Pope for Help, making some of these digitized documents accessible. This project underscores the personal nature of many of the appeals made to Pope Pius XII and the efforts, however constrained, made by the Vatican bureaucracy to respond to these desperate cries for assistance under immense pressure. Furthermore, documents unveiled by the Vatican's own archivist, Johann Ix, have revealed that Pope Pius XV established a specific office, the Ufficio Informazioni pro Prigionieri di Guerra, or Information Office for Prisoners of War, which also extended its work to help save endangered civilians, including Jews. This office systematically processed requests for help and coordinated aid efforts. These discoveries, while still in their early stages of analysis and interpretation, suggest a more active and engaged Pope than some earlier narratives have portrayed. They point towards a pontiff who was not detached from the suffering around him, but was in fact directly involved in attempts to provide concrete assistance, often through channels that were necessarily discreet and undocumented until now. Section 8. A Legacy re-examine shifting perspectives and ongoing research. The ongoing examination of the newly opened Vatican archives pertaining to Pope Pius XIII is gradually leading to a re-evaluation of his wartime legacy as more documents come to light, providing granular details about the Vatican's internal deliberations, diplomatic communications, and humanitarian efforts. Some long-held assumptions are being challenged. This fresh evidence is compelling historians, including some who were previously critical of Pope Pius XII, to reconsider their interpretations. The emerging picture is one of greater complexity, revealing a papacy grappling with immense moral and practical dilemmas in an unprecedented global crisis, rather than one characterized by simple silence or indifference. Even Father Hubert Wolff, a prominent German church historian who had previously expressed critical views on Pius XIII's response to the Holocaust, has called for a reassessment based on the new documentation. The sheer volume of petitions from Jews seeking help and the evidence of Vatican efforts to respond to these pleas paint a picture of an institution actively, if often quietly, engaged in trying to mitigate suffering. While acknowledging the limitations and failures, the new material suggests that the narrative of a completely inactive or unsympathetic pope is an oversimplification. This shift indicates that the archival evidence is substantial enough to prompt a more nuanced scholarly discourse. The full impact of the archival openings will not be known for many years, given the vastness of the material. Researchers are meticulously sifting through diplomatic cables, internal memos, personal correspondence, and records of charitable activities. This painstaking work is essential to build a comprehensive understanding of the decisions made Pope Pius XII and the actions taken by the Holy See during the war. It is a long-term project that requires careful contextualization and cross-referencing of sources to avoid premature conclusions. The Asking the Pope for Help project, for instance, while revealing numerous interventions, also highlights the frequent frustrations and limitations encountered by the Vatican in its efforts to save lives against formidable opposition. This evolving understanding underscores the importance of primary source research in historical inquiry. For decades, the debate over Pius XIII was often fueled by limited information and strong opinions. The availability of extensive archival records now offers the potential for a more evidence-based and balanced assessment. While it is unlikely to end all disagreement, as interpretations of historical events can always differ, the new findings are enriching the conversation and moving it towards a more detailed appreciation of the Pope's actions within the specific constraints and dangers of his time. The re-examination of his legacy is a dynamic process, with future discoveries likely to add further layers to our understanding. Section 9. Hero or Silent Witness Towards a Balanced Understanding. The question of whether Pope Pius XIII was a hero who worked covertly to save thousands or a silent witness who failed in his moral duty to condemn evil publicly remains a complex and often emotionally charged issue. Decades after the end of World War II, his legacy continues to be debated by historians, theologians, Jewish communities, and the Catholic faithful. It is a discussion that resists simple answers, demanding instead a careful consideration of historical context, available evidence, and the multifaceted nature of his pontificate during a period of unparalleled brutality and moral collapse. Oversimplification risks obscuring the profound dilemmas he faced. The evidence of his direct and indirect actions to save Jews is compelling. the sheltering of thousands in Rome and in religious institutions across Italy, the interventions by papal nuncios in various occupied countries, and the newly revealed efforts of a dedicated Vatican office to assist the persecuted all point to a significant, if often hidden, humanitarian operation. Testimonies from Jewish survivors and leaders who expressed gratitude after the war further support the view that Pius XII was not indifferent to their plight. These actions, undertaken in secrecy to avoid Nazi retaliation, saved a demonstrable number of lives, suggesting a strategic compassion rather than passive observation. Conversely, the criticism regarding his public silence on the specific issue of the Holocaust cannot be dismissed. While he condemned wartime atrocities in general terms, the lack of an explicit, unequivocal public denunciation of the Nazi genocide of the Jews remains a painful point for many. Arguments that such a statement could have been counterproductive are plausible and supported by some historical instances like the Dutch experience. However, the moral imperative to speak out against such an unprecedented crime is also a powerful consideration. The debate hinges on whether his chosen path of quiet diplomacy and covert aid, while saving some, was the most ethically sound response available to the leader of a global moral institution. Ultimately, a balanced understanding of Pope Pius XII requires acknowledging both the significant rescue efforts he facilitated and the deep concerns surrounding his public reticence. The ongoing research in the Vatican archives is crucial as it continues to provide new data and perspectives that enrich this complex historical picture. It seems increasingly clear that he was neither a saintly hero without flaws nor a callous bystander. Rather, he was a human leader confronted with unimaginable evil, making difficult choices with limited options and imperfect knowledge in an era where every decision carried profound consequences. His legacy will likely remain a subject of study and debate, urging us to grapple with the challenging interplay of morality, diplomacy, and action in times of extreme crisis.
If you've enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.